educational progress to friends who do not like acronyms. NAEP has, for decades, provided us with critical information about what our nation's students know and can do in various subjects, including today's featured subject, geography. When we released the 2019 geography results back in April, which seems like decades ago now, we could only spotlight some of the results. And inevitably, people ask, well, what about kids who do class projects in geography class? Or what about kids whose teachers have special training in teaching geography? How do they do on NAEP? We couldn't dig in then, but now we can. So here's the plan for the next hour. We're going to show you how to analyze the data and use the data tool that we have for NAEP, and then we're going to talk about what to do with that data. So first up is Grady Wilburn. Grady is one of the best NAEP data experts at the National Center for Education Statistics, our partners who make NAEP happen. He will guide us through the NAEP Data Explorer and talk to us about NAEP. Then we'll shift to the geography guru, Michael Solom. I was very fortunate to meet Michael about a year ago. He expressed such enthusiasm for NAEP geography data and knows the data so well, we had to invite him to share his expertise with us. He'll highlight some findings and place them within the geography landscape. And then I'll be back with you to moderate the Q&A. You'll have questions, and Grady and Michael will have answers. So I will turn it over to Grady.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. Like Laura said, my name is Grady Wilburn, and I am a statistician at the National Center for Education Statistics. And what I'm going to do today is briefly give you an overview of what NAEP is, just for any of you all who may not be familiar. Then I'm going to show you just quick highlights of the geography report card that was released this past April, like Laura mentioned, just so you all can get familiar with where to find these results. And then finally, turn my attention to the NAEP Data Explorer. You'll also hear me refer to it as the NDE. Yeah, we like our acronyms, as you can tell. And then I'll show you how to dig into there, and then I'll turn it over to the geography guru, Michael Solom. So first, like Laura said, the National Assessment of Educational Progress in NAEP measures what students can do at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade level. What you're seeing on your screen now is nationsreportcard.gov. This is where you would go to find any of the reports, regardless of the subject that we have released, the most current reports, as well as some of the archive reports. Now, although we do collect data across several subjects, as you can see here on your screen, all those subjects off to your left, NAEP is congressionally mandated to report state-level data in grades 4 and 8 every 2 years in math and reading, and then national level results for grade 12 every 4 years. We also report data for 27 large urban districts in 4th and 8th grade math and reading. It's a voluntary program that these districts participate in. And you can kind of understand the benefit of the NAEP assessment since it is administered standardly across all schools. We come in and we collect the data ourselves with tablet computers. It provides an opportunity for policymakers, for researchers to see how their state is doing in math and reading, for example, and then to see how other states may be doing in math and reading or other subjects. When you look at our social studies assessment, particularly geography, another benefit is while students will complete the cognitive portion of the assessment, we also ask students to complete a student questionnaire. And the student questionnaire, I have been working for NCS for 10 years, and I still will tell you the best way to find a student questionnaire is to just Google NAEP student questionnaire. This bar is in my way. So I'll just Google NAEP student questionnaire, and it'll pop up right there. And what it will do is it allows you to see all of the items that the students were asked to complete after they completed their geography test. And so we ask students to complete items. We also ask the teachers of those students to complete items. And then we also ask the school. And the types of questions that we have on there, if I could just open up, here's a school questionnaire. When you click on one of those links, it'll just open up a PDF of all the questions. And so the school administrator, usually the principal, the vice principal, they're just asked to complete just some questions about their school building, percent of NSLP eligible, for example, across demographics, but they're also asked to report to answer items on the type of materials that are available at the school or the type of materials that teachers have access to. Teachers are asked about their credentials, their training, what they do in the classroom. They're asked about their graduate focus, their undergraduate focus. And what it allows you to do as a researcher is to see, okay, if you're interested in geography, for example, maybe the teachers who have this type of credential, this type of preparation, how did the students who have those teachers perform on the National Assessment of Educational Progress compared to students that may not have that? Or you can do crosstabs looking for NSLP eligible by race and to see how their experience is described by these different questionnaires could differ or be the same as another group of students. And so the utility in NAEP is really, the cognitive portion is very important, but the utility is often in those questionnaires and mining those different questionnaires to get an understanding of what's asked before you dive into the NDE. So quickly, I just want to show you the geography report card. To get there, again, you would just go to nationsreportcard.gov, and then under reports, you would just go over to where you see geography. And so again, this is 2018 data. These data were collected in 2018 between January and March, and it was just 8th grade. And as you see here, when you look at our performance in 2018, it was significantly lower than the performance in 2014 and not different than the performance back in 1994. Excuse me, we go back to 1994 because that was the first year we collected geography data under this particular framework. I wanted to point out that in geography, we do have some content areas. And so while we have the overall geography score, we do separate geography into 3 content areas, and you see those on your screen: space and place, environment, and society, and spatial dynamics and connections. And you can see how the performance compared to 2018 looked and compared to 2014 and 1994. We also have results by race ethnicity. I should point out that NAEP is a representative assessment, meaning that we don't assess every single student in the nation, or if we're doing state or district level results, we don't assess every student in that state or that district. We collect data from a sample of students and then aggregate up to the group. So there's no student or school level results available. For geography, you're gonna have national, you can have census regions. Otherwise, we report our results by different student groups, race, ethnicity being one, gender, English learner, students with disabilities, where your school was located, meaning suburb, town, rural, or city. So I thought that's important to point out. And then here, looking at some of the, one of the questions that we asked in our assessment, which was asking the 8th grade students, when did you take a geography class? And so we can see here that what % of 8th grade students reported taking a geography class in 8th grade. And so you see here that 63% of students reported either taking a class mainly focused on geography or a class that included some geography topics in 8th grade. And there's some interesting findings in the report about how that relates to performance. And I know I want to caution on this. I believe Michael will probably also give you the same caution that when you're looking at performance with the different variables, these are just correlational. So you can't infer causation. You can just say that the 2 variables are related, but we can't say that one impacts the other. All right, and so now what I'm going to do is just go over to the NAEP Data Explorer. The best way to get to the NAEP Data Explorer is if you go to the nationsreportcard.gov. The NAEP Data Explorer is one of our data tools. So you just simply go to Data Tools and then click where it says Data Explorer. And then the NAEP Data Explorer, what it is, it's a tool that sits on top of all of our data across all the subjects and across all the grades. And it allows you via drop-down menu to select the different categories you want to look at all of those items that I just quickly went over in the student questionnaire so that you could click a box, I want to look at how this race ethnicity performs by this question that I saw in the student questionnaire, it allows you to do those data pools and gives you results that you could export, that you could PDF, that you could create charts by. And what this is called is the circle of death. Usually, when I just click to the NAEP Data Explorer, it'll open, but for some reason, it's giving me a little bit of trouble here. Let me see if I can close some windows, if that will help. Okay, so you're gonna have to take my word that the NAEP Data Explorer is this really cool, user-friendly connection that usually works pretty quickly. I didn't predict this happening. I did predict when I start pulling the data that when it pulls the data, sometimes it takes some time to go talk to the data and then pull it back out. That usually takes a moment. And so I did some pre-slugged analysis so that we can look at those. But I really did want you to see the interface so that I could walk you through exactly how to do that. Let me see if I refresh if that works. No. Okay. I'm going to go to the reports that I pulled, and hopefully the Data Explorer will pull back up eventually. Then I could back into how I did these different data pools. So one data pool that you may want to look at is looking at how race ethnicity, for example, looked in geography in 2018. And so again, hopefully the NAEP Data Explorer pops up and I can show you how to do those things exactly. But what will happen is it will spit out a report given the criteria that you specified to be analyzed. And so, oops. Okay, this is really, all right, here we go. Okay, and so what I did is I selected the variable race ethnicity, and then I selected the statistic that I wanted to see was average scale score. And so what it pulls up is a table here that has for the national public. Remember, geography results are only available at the national level. So we have national public, which is all public school students. And then if I'm able to show you the ND, you have national, which would be all students, so public school students and private school students. And so here what you see is the performance by the different groups, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, et cetera, and what they scored. This is for 2018, and then you see below it also has the data for 2014. When we talk about results as far as we being NCS when releasing the results, all we talk about are differences that are statistically significant. And so it's important that if you are going to be using these data, that you understand when something is significant and when it isn't. You see some numeric differences here, but you also want to consider the error around these numbers given that they're estimates. And so the way you do that in this tool is there's two ways. One way is you can just click here where it says add significance test, and you can do it across the categories, which would mean the different race ethnicities, or you can do it across the years. We'll do categories. I'll select white, and then what it will do is now it's comparing all of these groups, Black, Hispanic, Asian, to the student group, white. Let me zoom in just a little bit in case you can't see that. And so it added asterisks here that indicate whether or not that value is statistically different from the value that I selected. And so you see here is asterisks next to Black, Hispanic, and two or more races. And those asterisks, again, are indicating that they are statistically different from the white value of 269. You don't see asterisks next to Asian and American Indian Alaska Native because those values are not deemed to be statistically significant. The American Indian Alaska Native, even though that's a pretty large numeric difference, it's such a small population that the standard error around that value is pretty big, which makes it often difficult to detect statistical significance. That's one downside of using samples, but otherwise it's not feasible. Something else that I wanted to point out was that we have the availability to do crosstabs. So instead of looking at just race ethnicity, you can look at race ethnicity by gender, for example. In this example, what I looked at was NSLP eligible, that's the National School Lunch Program, that's our socioeconomic status indicator, by whether or not the student reported taking a geography class in 8th grade. And so what you can do is when you click that, you'll see that it's a very similar layout. I had these pulled beforehand, so it's not supposed to be doing that. But what you can do is you can create charts. So we have options to create bar charts or line charts. I showed you just previously one way to do a significance test, but you can also do a significance test where you compare every group to each other. So what I did is I selected a group to compare, which was white, and then all the other groups were comparing to that groups. With this create significance test, what you can do is you compare every group to each other, and it'll spit out a table that allows you to look at that. The create gap analysis, which isn't available for this particular data run, it allows you to see if gaps in one year are different from gaps in the previous year. So say you want to look at in geography whether or not the difference between students eligible for the National School Lunch Program had a gap of 15 points between those eligible and not eligible in 2018, and the gap in 2014 was 23 points, right? And so you can compare with the create gap analysis that 15 points to that 23 points. Let me take you to this table now that it came up. And so again, what I did is I did a crosstab with NSLP eligible. We have 3 different categories, either eligible, not eligible, or the information wasn't available, by whether or not they took a class that had a main focus of geography, a class that included some geography content, they did not take a geography class at all, or they just don't remember. They just don't remember. And what you see here is the scale score for those different student groups, as well as the percent of students that fall into that particular student group. And this is still spinning, so I was kind of hoping it would have been.
Great. Grady, may I interrupt us for a moment? I think Ebony has pulled up the NAEP Data Explorer interface on her computer. I think we're going to shift over to there just so that you can see the tool as it exists without the circle of death. We want a circle of life, not a circle of death. Yeah, that'd be great. So I think we're going to shift over. So if you turn off your video, I think we're going to get over to, this is like fingers crossed this is going to work. As always, right? Hold on. I feel like this is going to be the trick. I should turn on my video so you can see my own slight panic. I think this is the one day that they're clearly doing maintenance on it, obviously. Yeah. Everyone would be flooding the site after this workshop to go on. I think that's what it is. I think everybody who's listening to us right now just went to the NDE, and now it's just going really slow. Right. All right. Well, I don't. All right.
Ebony, if you go. Hi, Ebony. If you're able to go to share content at the bottom of your screen next to your video icon, there you go. Great. Awesome.
Ebony, I'll talk us through it unless you wanted to do it. Why don't I just take that initiative and talk us through it? So let's start with the subject drop-down menu. So here is what you would choose the subject you want. We're going to choose geography. We do have geography in grades 4, 8, and 12. The most recent data that was released in April was just grade 8, but we have old data back in 2010 for geography. Where it says year, this is where you wanted to look at trend, for example. You can look at the years that we have collected geography data and just check the box if you want to look at those data by those different years. And then for the scale, the composite scale is just that overall geography score, but like I mentioned, we have these content areas. And so you can also look at performance just within those content areas. As we go down to jurisdiction, again, geography is only available at the national level. National includes both public and private students, or you can just select just public or just private students, but I think keeping it at national is just fine. For variables, this is where you're going to have all your fun. Variable is where those items that I just turned your attention to in the student, teacher, and school questionnaire, all of those items are housed within the variables tab. And so the first look you have here is the major reporting groups. That would be your race, ethnicity, your gender, your NSLP, your SD, student disability, your English language learner status. So if you wanted to focus on a particular student group, this is where you would do that. But we also have different factors within major reporting groups. So you can look at region, you can look at school location, charter school. Ebony, if you go to select the category and choose the teacher factors, let's see, yeah, let's go to teacher factors. So teacher factors, again, we have the demographics of teachers. If you go to select the subcategory, Ebony, and choose the preparation, credentials, and experiences, here's where are housed all the items that teachers have answered, asking about their preparation, credentials, and experience. And so you can see some professional development items here. You can see some classroom management, whether or not they work with other teachers or on their own. You can see some years taught, a lot of different questions here to help contextualize your findings. And as you know, geographers, geography interests, our researchers, our professionals, you may have an idea of the type of items that you would want to pull. And I believe that after following me, Michael's probably going to pull a few of those, or has pulled a few of those for you all to look at. Let's go down to statistic, if you don't mind, Ebony. And so for statistic, the average scale score box is clicked by default. So if you do run an analysis, it's going to give you the scale score. But if instead of scale score, you want to look at the percentages, so what percent of students are in this category, you will click percent. You can look at the percent at the different achievement levels, at basic, at NAEP proficient, at NAEP advanced, and then cumulative at or above. If you were able to tune into the geography's release, you would have seen the Associate Commissioner, Peggy Carr, pulled out the average by percentiles. And the reason that's important is because although the average score went down a couple of points, it's important to see, is it the lower performers or the higher performers that may be, quote unquote, driving this decline or this increase. And so that's where you would pull those data. One more thing before I turn it over to Michael. Ebony, thank you so much for being able to walk us through that. Before I turn it over to Michael, is that when you are reporting these data, the unit of analysis is students. And so if you do looking at teacher data, you're not going to say this percent of teachers did such and such. You're going to say this percent of students had a teacher that did such and such. And so when you are doing this and when you are explaining these findings, it's very important that you always capture findings in terms of the students. So with that, I apologize for this not going as smoothly as I thought, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Solom to discuss using the NAEP Data Explorer to analyze geography achievement in ways that he thought would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Grady. Finally figured out how to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Solom. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to spend some time taking a closer look at the 2018 Geography Report with the help of the Data Explorer. I'll provide examples of how the tool can address questions of interest to researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. In addition, I will provide commentary to illustrate the value of NAEP data for reflecting on educational practice. I'll conclude my presentation by sharing information about upcoming events the AAG is organizing to build capacity for research using NAEP geography data. Following my presentation, we'll open up the workshop to questions and discussion with the audience. In geography, NAEP assesses student achievement in 3 content domains: space and place, environment and society, and spatial dynamics and connections. Within each content domain, questions test student cognition in 3 dimensions: knowing, for example, what is it, where is it? Understanding, for example, why is it there? How did it get there? What is its significance? And applying, for example, how can geographic knowledge and understanding solve problems? The NAEP Data Explorer allows you to examine geography achievement as a composite score of all 3 content domains or a score for a single content domain. I'd like to focus on scores in the environment and society domain, which measures students' knowledge of how people depend upon, adapt to, are affected by, and modify the natural environment. One of the noteworthy findings in the 2018 Geography Report that you can see here was that the average score in the environment and society domain has declined with each assessment. In fact, the average score in 2018 is significantly lower than it was back in 1994. NAEP reports don't explain trends in achievement, so it is up to stakeholders to dig deeper into the NAEP data for clues, and the Data Explorer is a great place to get started. Before we get to some example geography reports, here are a couple of release items from the 2018 Geography Assessment to illustrate how NAEP measures student achievement in the environment and society content domain. This question is, what major beneficial effect does the summer monsoon have on the economy of India? And all of us in the audience perform at NAEP Advanced and know the answer is D. Here's another example. Students are asked to examine the political cartoon and then address these questions. Name one positive impact of offshore drilling. Name one negative impact of offshore drilling. Describe one way to help save oil reserves for future generations. And you can go to that NAEP Data Explorer site and you'll find a questions tool tab. That's where you can go in and examine all of the release items on the geography assessment since 1994. Okay, so here's an example of a question that we can address with the Data Explorer. How is student achievement in the environment and society content domain related to curriculum and instructional factors? For example, taking a geography class in earlier grades, inquiry and problem solving, class debates and panel discussions, and field trips. Using the Data Explorer, I generated a report with a t-test of significance to compare scores of students on the basis of whether they had a geography class in the 6th grade. This chart shows students who had a 6th grade geography class scored 5 points higher on average than those who did not, which is a statistically significant result. This suggests prior geography coursework may be a factor contributing to higher geography achievement in later grades. Okay, so what about instructional factors? Here are 3 examples comparing achievement on the basis of a student's exposure to practices that many would argue are emblematic of effective geography instruction. Inquiry and problem solving are advocated in geography and social studies standards. Here's a chart comparing scores on the basis of how often students use geographic information to answer questions or solve problems. Students who responded never or hardly ever scored significantly higher compared to their peers who responded sometimes or always or almost always, there being an 11-point difference at the 2 extremes. In this next example, scores are compared on the basis of how often students took part in an environmental debate or class discussion during the school year. We can see statistically significant declines in achievement moving from never to more than 5 times. This example compares scores on the basis of how many geography field trips students attended during the school year. Similar to the previous report, we see significant declines in achievement with greater frequency of attending field trips. So what explains all this? Well, as Grady mentioned earlier, we need to interpret these data reports with caution and not jump to conclusions. All these analyses I just presented do not support claims about causality. And we know from our research in geography education of the value of inquiry and other active pedagogies for enhancing the learning and appreciation of geography. At the same time, the data reports I just displayed are consistent with more sophisticated statistical models of NAEP social studies assessments. Here's an excerpt from a study of the U.S. history assessment. The authors conducted a factor analysis that produced 2 categories of instructional variables: text-dependent instruction and multimodal instruction. The study found that a standard deviation increase in text-dependent instruction corresponds with an increase in achievement on the history assessment. On the other hand, a standard deviation increase in multimodal instruction relates to a decrease in achievement. This suggests there may be a risk in taking classroom time away from other forms of instruction that appear associated with higher levels of achievement in history. So for geography, it raises an issue for further investigation. Are lower achieving geography students overexposed to multimodal instruction? This is a question we can address as we move forward with multi-level statistical modeling of the NAEP geography assessment data, which I'll discuss a little later. But another possibility that occurred to me in viewing these reports is that students may be experiencing inquiries and field trips that lack strong objectives for them to learn geographic content knowledge. While students may learn useful skills from these experiences, how to use a GPS, take water and soil samples, make a map in the field, and so forth, they may not become more geographically knowledgeable as an outcome. This is simply something that occurred to me when reflecting on the Data Explorer reports, and I'd be curious to know what others might think when we get to the question and answer session. Moving on, I'd like to address another question using the NAEP Data Explorer. What are the percentages and characteristics of students performing at NAEP Basic, Proficient, and Advanced on the geography assessment? Well, before we look at some data, here are the definitions of the NAEP achievement levels. Essentially, basic refers to prerequisite knowledge needed to become proficient, proficient representing competency over challenging subject matter, NAEP advanced, superior performance expected of top students compared to others industrialized nations. Okay. So here's a table showing the percentages of male and female students at each achievement level on the geography assessment. T-tests of significance indicate no meaningful population differences at the below basic level. The largest proportions of male and female students fall at the basic category, with significantly higher percentages of females. Students in the proficient and advanced levels are more likely to be male than female, although proportions are very low. On this table, we see percentages of students at each achievement level by race and ethnicity. Relative to white students, statistical tests indicate significantly higher percentages of Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students at the below basic achievement level. At the basic level, percentages of white students are significantly higher compared to their Black peers, whereas at the proficient level, percentages of students who are white are significantly higher than for Black, Hispanic, and multiracial students. Only a very small percentage of students performed at advanced. Statistically speaking, Black 8th graders are virtually non-existent at the advanced level. So the subtitle of this webinar was, why does it matter? I'd like everyone to take a look at these numbers and ask yourself that question. I think we all have a responsibility, given the general public's misunderstanding of what geography is all about. We have a responsibility for geography and social studies educators and organizations to explain the significance of the subject matter assessed by NAEP. And so I'd like to comment on why it matters from the perspective of a project that I think supports productive conversations about what geography adds to the education of young people. The project I'm referring to is GeoCapabilities. It's an international collaboration funded since 2012 by grants from the National Science Foundation and the European Union. You see some of the team right there. GeoCapabilities is advancing a theory for geography and education that rests on the following premise. Geography is a form of powerful knowledge. Powerful knowledge is a complex idea, but in brief, it is knowledge that is characteristic of the substance, theory, perspectives, and practices of different academic fields and disciplines. As such, powerful knowledge supports thinking that is systematic, conceptual, and disciplinarily robust. GeoCapabilities argues for a curriculum of engagement in geography's powerful knowledge to help all young people think geographically about the world, use geographic knowledge to participate effectively in discussions and debates about important issues, and pursue their life and career aspirations. When schools fail to provide an opportunity to learn geography, young people are less capable of doing these things, which we refer to as capabilities deprivation. Because the NAEP assessment framework is consistent with the disciplinary content and ways of thinking expressed in geography standards, I think it can be reasonably argued that the geography knowledge that NAEP measures is powerful. Looking at the geography assessment in this light, I think the achievement data and gaps take on added gravity. In the terms of the GeoCapabilities project, the lack of educational progress in geography over the past quarter century represents a systemic denial of young people's rights to access knowledge that is crucial for individual enhancement and capability. And that is one view of why everyone should care about the quality and status of geography in schools. So on that note, what can be done to expand access to geography's powerful knowledge? Some might view this question in terms of quantity, that is, adding geography requirements at more grade levels. While many of us would certainly like to see more geography taught in more states across the nation, GeoCapabilities project would argue that what ultimately matters is the quality of the subject matter that students encounter in school. And here's a quote from Professor David Lambert, director of the GeoCapabilities project. I've highlighted some words and phrases that I think are worth reflection. David's questions frame access to powerful knowledge in terms of the process by which teachers, educators select subject matter for instruction, and how it can be aligned to the student context and everyday experiences. Let's think about David's questions in the context of NAEP research in the social studies. Consider this interpretation of achievement gaps between white students and students of color on the NAEP U.S. History Assessment. Let's give everyone some few seconds to read that paragraph. To me, the author's interpretation of the achievement gaps implies a need to figure out a way to help teachers in geography select subject matter that is powerful on the one hand and significant from the student's perspective on the other hand. And consider this in relation to a new report by the National Academies which highlights new demands on teachers. The report notes that teachers are entering the profession increasingly expected to do three things: set teaching goals that require improved disciplinary content knowledge and culturally relevant pedagogy, while preparing students for the workforce by helping them apply content to novel problems and situations. 2, create equitable learning environments that account for the greater diversity of students and the experiences they bring into schools. And 3, select subject matter and create instructional materials that support implementation of new curriculum standards in the states. Now, we can help geography teachers meet these new demands by leveraging NAEP data in our future research and practical programs. Perhaps others can share their ideas about how we should do this in the question and answer session coming up next. But to conclude, I'd like to give everyone a briefing on some research plans involving the NAEP geography assessment and some of the upcoming opportunities to get involved. We have a National Center for Research in Geography Education headquartered at the AAG in Texas State. One of our active NSF grants is supporting a multi-level statistical analysis of all existing NAEP geography data, similar to methods used in NAEP math, history, economics, and arts assessment studies. The goal is to produce statistically rigorous predictive models of achievement using the big data sets produced by NAEP background surveys with students, teachers, and school principals. Our initial study currently underway is focusing on trends in achievement in relation to student background characteristics, school type, school composition, and school location over the period 1994 to 2014, a 20-year period which captures major reforms from standards to federal policies such as No Child Left Behind. Once the 2018 data become available to researchers, we will update our models to bring it up to the 25-year period. Anyway, the first study will set the stage for additional modeling that accounts for curriculum instructional factors, teacher characteristics, and so forth. And our hope is to have the results available to present at an event scheduled in early December. And that event is a symposium at the 2020 CUFA National Council for the Social Studies Conference, which will be held virtually. The symposium has two goals: explore opportunities for research collaboration and capacity building in the area of social studies educational assessment using NAEP data, and identify research questions that can impact policy and practice recommendations by professional associations that NAEP data are uniquely positioned to address. And then about a year from now, we have funding from NSF to do a research conference focused on the geography NAEP data sets more closely. We will plan research projects to address questions that emerge from that symposium in December at NCSS, but we'll also want to take a look at the latest results of the multi-level modeling project and how we can build new lines of research using that as a springboard. And then we'll also have sessions for participants to learn research techniques for analyzing NAEP data. Well, I think it's clear that I only skimmed the surface of the capabilities of NAEP and NAEP data. We have a lot of work to do, and we need a lot of help. And so I invite everyone who'd be interested to join our new NAEP Research Network in Geography Education by visiting that site or contact me over email. Thanks for your participation. I'll hand it back to Laura.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to both Grady and Michael for such helpful and thought-provoking presentations. I have two questions already lined up in the Q&A. We're going to go to the first one, which is for Michael. There is an interest in doing some basic applied GIS mapping or analysis of NAEP. Do we know if those options are available? I fear the answer, but maybe there are, maybe you have creative solutions.
The NAEP geography assessment is a national level assessment. And so that means inferences about the achievement data are to a national level population. Other NAEP assessments such as math, reading, are conducted at the national, state, and trial urban district level. So I think that's where you would have a little more potential to do some spatial analytical modeling of the NAEP data, since you have multiple scales in which the data has been collected. In the geography assessment, what you can do is you can examine achievement patterns by census district, by urbanicity. But in order to do some, my sense is, and I would have to actually go back and look into the restricted data. I don't want to say you can't do it, but the restricted NAEP data that the multi-level modeling is performed on, these are restricted because they're individual level responses to the NAEP assessment. So there's a huge data set. There were almost 13,000 students, for example, in the 2018 data. You know, and there may be ways of looking for whether the school level data. It's hard for me to. I wouldn't expect there to be geolocated data because of confidentiality issues. Then again, by getting access to the restricted data, you have to uphold those confidentiality. And so it may be possible, but that's just a question. I'm going to have to go back in and look at the restricted data as to whether you can do some spatial analysis of achievement. I think it'd be really a fascinating project if it's doable.
The interesting part is that, you know, that first question was about doing a GIS analysis of the NAEP data, and then someone else added a question about whether using GIS software in the classroom has helped, is that linked to higher scores on geography? So it's like kind of a meta question. It's like a...
Yeah, well, great question to ask, and I just encourage you to go to that website, find out, and report back. Not to be flip, but you can go into that NAEP Data Explorer, and you can pull out those contextual variables that deal with classroom resources, access to geospatial technology in classrooms and schools. Questions students ask: have you used GIS at this grade level? At what grade level? So yeah, you can begin to look at those relationships between achievement and various technologies, access to technology at school or access to the technology at home. It's all these are the kind of things that that Grady pointed out is collected alongside the achievement data, which then allows you to perform these analyses, comparing achievement in relation to these various student level, teacher, classroom level, and school level variables.
Yeah, it's a wealth of data that sometimes get overlooked when we do the release events, but are so rich in specificity that you can really dig in. The next question is for, and it really dovetails nicely off this last one, is for Grady about the reliability of the survey questions. I'm going to turn that one over to Grady.
Sure. So that's a great question. Obviously, these are, in this case, 8th graders who we're relying on their memory and how they're recalling their experience. The only way we would really be able to confirm their responses would be to check their transcripts or something to make sure that what they indicated was correct. We do, however, have a high school transcript study, and we were able to compare for 12th graders what actually happened as far as course taking and the percent that we picked up on NAEP as to what these 12th graders indicated. While the percentages were very close, we did find that some of the responses were overreported and some were underreported. There's some social desirability going on there where people may want to say they took a class or they participated in an activity when in actuality they don't. So I guess the short answer is we don't know, honestly. We have some evidence to suggest there may be a disconnect, but we have nothing to empirically really back that up.
It's always the way with self-report data. It's always tricky like that. And there's a question that is kind of a secondary question to that one about can we look at, and I think the answer is yes, I don't want to, if you can look at the geography questions over time. So whether it says, the question from Thomas suggests test questions from 1994 to present, but it might be the contextual questions from 1994 to present. Are those available so you can see how those questions change over time?
Yes, so that link that I pointed out, if you just go to NAEP student questionnaires, I think I pointed out the 2019 questionnaire, or 2018 questionnaire. But as you scroll down the page, you'll see the 2014 one. You scroll further down, you'll see the 2010 one. And so you'll be able to see the questions, the student questionnaire questions that the students, teachers, and schools participated. As far as the cognitive items, we do release items after every assessment so that you can get a flavor, if you will, of the types of cognitive items that the students are seeing. That would be accessible via the NAEP questions tool. If you go to that nationsreportcard.gov, where it said data tools, where I showed you this to find a data explorer, that same menu, you'll see the NAEP questions tool. And those questions are organized by grade, difficulty, content areas. You can see example responses. You can see the percent that got the questions correct. So the NAEP Data Explorer is one of several tools that we have accessible to make the content and the items more accessible to researchers and those interested in them.
Yeah, and I noticed when I was pulling the geography examples for this presentation that when you go into the Data Explorer and you say, I went to that question about how many field trips did you participate in, and then the descriptive metadata will also come out and it'll indicate which years of the geography assessment was that question asked on. So if you see 1994, 2001, 2010, 2014, 2018, that means that question was part of those background surveys, all 5 of the assessments. So one of the things we're interested in looking at with the multi-level modeling is, to the extent possible, do a trend analysis of achievement in relation to some of those background variables that are asked over multiple assessments. So when you go back to that slide I had to start off with, I can find it real quick. Oops. There we go. We go back.
Michael, I'll pass you control really quick. Hold on 1 second.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna display the trend data for the environment and society scores. Each year, NAEP assessed geography. There was a downward trend in achievement that was statistically significant. So a research question would be, what else, maybe is that displaying now? So a research question would be, what other trend alongside that achievement data happened in the geography education system? Was policy related, curriculum related? Was teacher backgrounds changed? Did more human geography, social science content become emphasized? You know, we don't really know, but we can begin to find out that's why we need to dig deeper into these data and how it permits us to empirically get a really strong grasp of what changed alongside that downward trend in achievement. That's something that we can investigate.
It's the benefit of having these assessments over time, right? So you can actually see those kinds of changes, and then think about what was going on in those years that could be affecting, which is interesting. And then this will be we only have time for, I think, one more question. But Michael, I think that you were powerfully persuasive because someone was wondering whether NAEP state coordinators can join your research group. Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. Oh yeah, that'd be great. Because we want to, you said NAEP state coordinators. Yeah, that would be fantastic. I mean, I think we got to build in as many perspectives as we can, and we need to build capacity. And you know, we're a relatively small field of research in geography education, but we got to build stakeholders around this geography assessment because its significance isn't confined to those who are geography educators and teachers. There are a lot of societal implications of having a geographically knowledgeable citizenry. in addition to it being a matter of social justice, in my view, for young people to learn geography in schools. So we got to expand the stakeholders. We got to get as many people involved as possible to do this work. So I would very much welcome contacting me and joining this research network so we can stay in touch as we move forward.
And NAEP state coordinators are such a good resource for understanding NAEP. That's we appreciate the enthusiasm. I'm going to just one last thing, because I think it's an important point that was just raised, that the idea of sometimes and this can be for you, Michael, and this will be truly the last question. Sometimes you get, I think what this question is asking about is sometimes when you go through the NAEP Data Explorer and you do some analyses, and Grady, you can answer this too, of course, you sometimes get what seems like illogical associations, right? Where like, oh, the more geography classes I've taken, the not as great performance on NAEP, right? So it's just, I think really briefly, you can explain how you think through when you get illogical, what seems like counterintuitive findings, and just your steps, and then we'll end it there.
I think when you see these kind of counterintuitive results, and quite frankly, when I found the results that I displayed with inquiry and field work and environmental debates, I mean, I was taken aback at first, but then you start thinking about it and what could possibly explain it. Well, I think that's the value of the Data Explorer, is that you come to it not necessarily to get definitive answers, but to reflect on the achievement data. What does it suggest about research opportunities and future research that we need to be doing? So I think a counterintuitive result, you can turn that around very productively by developing a research project to investigate what might be going on. And here again, I think you get a lot closer to explanation when you bring in some of the more sophisticated statistical modeling of the achievement data that allow you to look at the specific estimate of a variable's contribution to achievement while holding things constant, other possibilities constant, right? And so that's how you start to disentangle, what really seems to be explaining performance at different levels on the assessment.
Oh, you're muted, Laura.
I like Grady's telling me that I'm on mute. Thank you very much for that. You see, good teamwork. But you don't have anything to add to that question, that answer. No, okay, great, thanks. Okay, so this, thank you very, very much for joining us today. That will be our, we're wrapping this up. I want to say a huge thanks to Grady and to Michael for some stellar presentations and for answering your questions. Huge thanks to my colleague at the Governing Board, Stefan Harris, the crew at AG, Ebony Walton from NCS with the quick save, and our team at Hatcher for this very enlightening session. Huge thanks to all of you for joining us on this journey today. We'll be posting the recorded session for all posterity on the Governing Board website. Share with friends, play it again later, do what you like with it. We hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly did. I learned a lot. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks.